this note here is going to be something, it can be taken as a note about spiritualism, but it also can be considered commentary, some kind of rational commentary about human behavior in the context of like recent and current societal trends. What I'm going to address here is the idea and the recent patterns of the presence of ugliness, the ugly. So the ugly is a group. And I'm going to utilize the template of good, bad, and ugly. So there's a bit of a presence of ugliness in society for some time. And in terms of understanding the template of good, bad, and ugly, we're going to use as like a guiding principle the idea of balance, that there's a necessary balance for functionality and health societally. So in New York, for example, there's quite a presence of some things that we can call ugly. Lots of garbage on the streets, plenty of homelessness, drug addicts. The interesting thing in referring to these instances is that ugliness can easily be mistaken for badness, because ugliness is not necessarily well defined. I think most people wouldn't quite have a strong definition or understanding of ugliness as it works fundamentally. So in seeing something like drug addicts, homelessness, it can be interpreted as, well, that's human suffering. And it also could be interpreted kind of in a good sense, in the sense that it's an opportunity for charity. It's an opportunity for doing good. But as a group, ugly doesn't behave in the way that people quite understand. The difference between ugly and bad is that bad has kind of a rhyme or reason to it. Or to put it a bit more simply, it's still connected to the natural. So we can say perhaps that we can argue that bad is unnatural, but therefore it's still like a derivative of natural. It's still connected to, it's still somewhat rooted in natural. It's inverse to natural. So when we look at good and bad, we can say, well, good and bad have an inverse relationship. And that therefore demonstrates a bit how natural and unnatural could be connected. Because we could say, well, there's hot, but then we could say there's cold. There's high, there's low, there's light, there's dark. These are inverse things. Now, ugly operates outside of that. But how so? Ugly is like the trash component. It is the waste byproduct. And it is like this distorted, it kind of fits the word of ugly, or the idea of ugly, where it's a deformity. It is something that is like irredeemable. It's kind of beyond the scope of clean or dirty, because whether ugly is clean or dirty, it still remains ugly. And so in studying how ugly works in the human sense, it's interesting because it would seem the ugly do consider themselves, or perhaps understand themselves to be like beyond redemption. So there's a kind of misery that comes with that can be interpreted as badness within a person. So the miserableness that comes out of it leads to a constant reckless or hostile or disturbed behavior. So you see even that idea, disturbed. When you observe something that's disturbed, it's easy to interpret that and say, well, this is bad that's happening there. But disturbed has a different quality to it, where it's kind of beyond the intent of the disturbed to determine what their output will be, what the result of their intentions and actions will be. So the ugly kind of function as almost a bad luck charm. Despite their intent, they just tend to always create a malformity out of their actions and their doings. And so I'll go on to further describe like some of this presence of ugly. So as I described somewhat before, I would say New York again as an example, so much garbage on the streets. So much garbage on the sidewalks. In recent history, 2025, lots of issues when it comes to public transportation, specifically the trains, the train stations. Lots of dysfunctions. Also, quite a presence of like construction, but as other New Yorkers do observe as well, especially on social media, there's some commentary about it. The construction goes nowhere. Nothing seems to be getting done. Those are ugly things, because inherently there's something disturbed going on in these different examples I'm pointing to. There's something that, despite the intent, the outcome seems to almost be like bad luck or misfortune continuously. As far as human behavior goes, in an individual, as I would perhaps make some observances about individuals that could be described as ugly, I'll go back to that miserable kind of quality, because it seems like it is a constant theme for the ugly to try to redeem something, to try to get over like the curse. Let's say it's almost as if they're cursed. Maybe it seems like maybe they observe themselves that way. And so there's constantly an interjection and like an imposing of themselves on their environment. Ugly tends to want to keep spreading, because it's not just the idea of misery loves company. It's the idea of them trying to escape their existence, escape themselves. And so there's a constant interjection. That's also, I guess, if we really think about the inner workings of why ugly is always misfortunate, or ugly always, despite its intentions, always creates these dysfunctional outcomes. We can say in the inner workings of ugly, there's this constant interruption and interference. There's always something that is coming against itself improperly. So, okay, let's think about it visually. Let's take a face, or let's take geometry. What makes something ugly is when things are coming into themselves or connecting in a way that is unseemly. It's not just that it's not proper. It is, in a visual and geometrical sense, it's something that is full of error. So good and bad don't work that way. And I think it's interesting to misinterpret ugly as bad is to misunderstand that bad doesn't tend to be full of error. You can say bad is having a fundamental error of just being bad, but beyond that, when it comes to intentions, when it comes to the cause and effect within the network of bad, when it comes to the effort and outcome system that happens with bad, it's not wrought with error, but ugly is. And so that's a fundamental difference. So when I look at some of the behavior, I'll see, people who have that ugliness, they constantly are interjecting. And first of all, I think ugly tries to disguise itself as bad sometimes, but it also tries to disguise itself as good. So it acts as if, oh, I'm trying to give you some assistance, or here's a direction, here's some input, here's some feedback, here's an ally, right? It tries to sometimes dress itself up like an ally, but unfortunately, ugly, being like afflicted like it is always after trying to not be afflicted. Again, that's another fundamental difference between bad, because bad doesn't attempt to be unafflicted. It's not working for the gain of its own unafflictedness. It is working for kind of this larger schema of the objectives of bad. But anyways, I will now address the important understanding of what the method is of undoing ugly. Because a lot of people, the interesting effect of ugly is that it creates this presence around itself that when people are not aware that it's ugliness, they like bemoan the different things in the world. So it's interesting because good and bad alike tend to be burdened by the presence of ugly. So people will look and like bemoan the state of things and feel like there is no fix, and because it doesn't adhere to the solutions of good or bad, right? So those things, as good is trying to act and bad is trying to act for its objectives on these sides, ugly is largely unaffected by a lot of those things. So there begs the question, well, how do you address ugliness? What is the method to reduce the burdening that ugliness brings on in the world? And it's simple enough. It's a beautiful thing. It's just the inverse of what ugly is what its undoing is, which is beauty. The presence of beauty eliminates ugly. When I look and see human behavior, I see like different trends in society. I would say that it does appear that beauty has been put upon by the presence of ugly. So the people who do have that beauty, I think, because they didn't understand that this was a presence of ugly causing the disturbance, they felt increased pressure, increased disturbance by it. Because I think ugly takes a whole different kind of aggression and interference towards the beautiful. So even though good and bad are feeling it, beautiful is being impacted by it a bit. But the wonderful thing about it is If we can say ugly is cursed, beauty is blessed. And so beauty has the great fortune of not having to do work like good and bad would have to do work. Not in that sense. Beauty, just connected to the fundamental concept of beauty. One of its great benefits of just being beautiful is that it's beautiful by presence, not necessarily by actions, just by presence, just by visage, just by image. Blessed, beautiful. And so there you go. The solution to addressing ugly is just the presence of beauty. When beauty makes itself present, when it makes itself a part of the world and is just there existing, when the beautiful people just are there existing, ugliness withers away. When beauty enters where ugly is trying to proliferate and exist, ugly it's increasingly like dysfunctional in the presence of that. But beauty just stays present, and ugliness withers away, goes into shambles. Because ugly is not necessarily hostile or at odds with beauty the way you would think good and bad tend to be at odds. Ugliness is just when it's aware of itself on that level, when it's seeing beauty and it's aware of itself being so ugly, it takes it upon itself to retreat. It takes it upon itself to unburden the world. So otherwise, ugliness doesn't tend to see its presence as being burdening, it seems. Ugly, you can say, in that sense, is misunderstood. And a large part of this note was me describing just that, how it could be misunderstood very easily from the outside looking in. If you think about it, good and bad are fairly well described in the world. Most people have a pretty clear definition on what that is, but ugly, not so much. And especially how it functions as some kind of order, some kind of collective. Ugly, even misunderstanding itself, once it is faced with beauty, already understands the burden that it creates. And because it's so intent on reducing its own afflictedness, its own cursedness at being ugly, it does tend to then do what it can to remove that burden, and that means it must remove its presence. I see, in the presence of ugliness, there are different ways it plays or interacts with good and bad, where it's just continually trying to exhaust the resources of good and bad so it can kind of unafflict itself. Yeah, so when you look at the different trends in society recently, we can say in 2025, perhaps in 2024, we can track some of these trends. This helps to describe what it has been, what is the method, what is the solution fundamentally. There you go. The presence of ugliness and the methods of reducing it in society.